So thank you everyone for coming. I'm Minni Jain from the Flow Partnership UK. And it's a charity that works with communities together collaboratively across the world, especially in India where we started. And you'll see some of the work that we're doing, facilitating and enabling communities to really hold water in their landscapes. And we work in Africa. We also work in the UK. We've done some work in Europe, and it's a growing movement. So wherever there are communities wanting to do more of that water holding work, holding water in their landscapes, using simple, sometimes traditional methods, that's where we, when we get invited, that's where we enable and facilitate that kind of work. So I'm going to share my screen, and we can quickly go through some of the slides. Right, I need to go into presentation mode. Great. Can everybody see my screen? Right. So when we were talking about the summit, and this is about last year or year before, when my colleague Rajinder Singh was there actually in person. I think it was pre-pandemic when there was a real on the ground gathering of everybody who's interested in earth repair. It all really started there, and then I had a very wonderful conversation with Michael, and it was amazing to see and know and hear and connect with so many people who are now feeling that passion and desire to do something about what is happening in the systems and that support life on the planet. And so I love the title. I love the title, Earth Repair. And for us, when we were talking about it, that earth repair isn't a one-off thing. It's a cycle of care. You can't do it today and not do it tomorrow. It's like our life. If we look after ourselves, we do it all our life. So why would we not do it for the systems that support our life? So that's why we call this this discussion and conversation today, Earth Repair, a Cycle of Care. And I thought this was, reading this a couple of days ago, and this was something that happened in the UK. And George Monbiot is one of our most wonderful and very, very thought-provoking journalists, and you might, of course, know of him. He writes in The Guardian, and he said, this event happened, these youngsters defaced this painting of Van Gogh in this gallery with tomato soup. And the question he posed was, do we really care about Van Gogh sunflowers or the real ones? And of course, there can be various answers to this. It can be we care about the real ones. It can be we care about Van Gogh, so we care about both. But what is the point that these youngsters are making? And the important point to note over here is that they're youngsters. So what is it? What is enraging them so much? Do we, these are real sunflowers. They can't but help bring this delight to the eye when you see the real sunflowers. And so if you can't see real sunflowers, it stands to reason that you would like to see what Van Gogh, who's a master, has done. But of course, we have to keep in mind that Van Gogh, when he painted them, and he was trying to earn his living as an artist, he was really, really poor. So suddenly his paintings in our age have become so expensive and costing millions and billions of pounds and dollars, and they are under so much security. And it begs the question that why are we spending so much money looking after artifacts like that when actually we could be spending something to, similar amounts to look after the real sunflowers on the planet and the system that supports real sunflowers to grow? This question really is, why are we so blind? Are we blind? Are those in power, why are they not listening that these youngsters, what all do they have to do? What do we have to do to get those in power to listen and know and see what we are doing, how the system is breaking down? And so to repair something, we have to first acknowledge it is broken. So the system that supports life is slowly breaking in front of our eyes. And this outrageousness that people have, that, oh, they shouldn't have defaced his painting. Of course, they didn't deface the painting. It was on the glass and they had calculated that. But it's not to force us from, not listening. It's like some people say, oh, no, I can't bear what these people are doing. I'm just not going to pay attention. But actually, it's on the contrary. How else do they get our attention? Why would young people decide to jeopardize their freedom? They could so easily easily be put in jail and their future prospects by doing something like this. They want us to hear. They are so concerned. How else do they get our attention? Who are the criminals over here? Those seeking to prevent this vandalism of the living planet, or those who are facilitating it? That's a really, really interesting question. And it's a question that demands an answer of us today. It's no longer something we can ignore. And of course, here's a wonderful, another fresh-faced teenager who's been reminding us of that for the last 4 years, Greta Thunberg, and very articulately and very eloquently and with absolute rage and anger, that what is the kind of planet are you going to leave for us? Is it going to be a burnt out wreck, or is it going to be a gift from you all? What is our generation doing? So how do we repair our breaking planet? So I love this image of a very healthy landscape. And, in conversation with another colleague, it is in the imagination, in the vision for our planet, that we first see what we want it to be. So, of course, we keep in our mind that it's breaking down, but what is it we want it to be? And that vision of a healthy planet with free-flowing rivers and greenery and life and mountains and the sun, that beauty that we want our planet, it has to be in the mind, and then we chase that vision. So one of the newest visions, I love this headline, is instead of having shareholders who are getting loads and loads of money, which they can then squirrel away in their bank accounts or wherever it is, rich people squirrel their money away. The Patagonia founder, and he's not a small guy, he says, Earth is now our only shareholder. What an amazing step to take. What an amazing vision to have, that we can, the material wealth that we have been squirreling away is actually belongs to the earth. It does not belong to us. And that when we make the earth rich, we will all be rich. What an amazing headline that was. And we hope that this will get more and more people thinking in a similar way. It's quite similar to the word ecocide when it was coined by another friend and colleague, that what we do to the earth is a crime and it should be treated as such. So the vision for the earth, as earth being our only shareholder, is a very powerful vision. And this vision we hear in the voices of the elders and the local communities and various different people across the world who don't make it to the pages of the newspapers or the TV channels. Some leaders do, but generally it is the small communities on the ground, often very, very poor, who are quietly getting on with doing what needs to happen. And sometimes they aren't able to do what needs to happen because they don't have the resources, or sometimes they have other challenges that keep them from doing what they need to do. So in today's presentation, as we go along, what I wanted to show you is some of the amazing work that some of our colleagues and partners have been doing in these small communities. Some of those small communities, their work, which is unsung in the global, wider worldly context, and I'd really like to show you, what small communities are doing, how we are enabling and facilitating that. And it's some of you may have heard me speak about these before, but as I say to everybody, that I don't ever tire of seeing this amazing work that communities are doing. So I never get tired of speaking about it. So I hope you don't get tired of hearing of it if you're hearing it again. So the first story I'll start with is of our colleague Rajendra, who you heard in the first Earth Repair Conference a couple of years ago. And Rajendra and I and my colleague Philip, we started this the Flow Partnership in the UK simply because we were so inspired by the work Rajendra was doing with the communities, and we thought this is what the planet needs. And I'm sure this is happening in different parts of the earth, and yet we don't know what's happening. So there has to be a linking together. But that linking together came from seeing and hearing the work he had done over the last 30 years. So the story begins when Rajendra actually began his work, which was a good 35 years ago. And he was an Ayurvedic doctor, and he used to live in Delhi, and young man, and you'll see photos of him coming up in a minute. So Delhi, if you look, is somewhere here. And Rajasthan, the state which is very, very dry, some of you might have been to India and seen the deserts over there. and know that it's a very dry state. So when he heard about, as a young man, this is 1984, 1985, early 80s, when he heard of the drought and the misery that some of the people in Rajasthan, some communities and villages were facing, that they didn't even have food to eat. And he thought to himself, I'm a young man, I'm from a good family, I have food to eat. I should go over and, go and give them some, they might need medicine. I should do some service to the villagers. And as he was talking to some of his friends, four of them said, three of them said that, oh, we'll come along with you. We'll give education and medicine to the villagers. So these four young men got onto the bus. And as often happens in India, when they asked for a ticket to the last stop, and the last stop was, of course, 2 days away. And you can imagine young people traveling in the bus, young men, all beards, etc. And they arrive, it's getting dusk, and they arrive at this small village in the back of beyond of Rajasthan. And the bus stops and these guys get out. And slowly the villagers, you can imagine them coming up. They're all old women, men, old men, and a few children, because all the youngsters had left the village. There was no food in the village. There was nothing growing over there. And so they come to these four young men and think, oh my God, look at these young fellows, all these beards, they must be terrorists. And, and yet there was a sort of a feeling, that hospitality in Indian villages is very, very huge. And they said, right, it's getting dark. There's the temple courtyard. You all can sleep over there and let's talk tomorrow. And the next morning, Rajendra and his three friends, they started going around the village and said, look, we haven't come here to frighten you. We are not terrorists. What we want to do is find out what your problems are. And if there's anything we can do to help, I'm a doctor, he's a teacher, and so for the whole week, that's what they went around the village offering their services. And they noticed something very interesting. They noticed that everybody was very sweet and kind to them. And they said, yes, very nice, young people, you've got a good heart. This is very noble of you. But nobody really engaged with them properly. Nobody really sort of had any deep, meaningful conversation with them. And they just politely nod their heads. So, his three friends, they said, oh God, these villages are completely hopeless. Even if they get free medicine and free education, they don't want it. What can you do for such people? So they annoyed, dejected, whatever, and they left. But Rajendra stayed on. And this is a photo of Rajendra recently, and he's also called the Waterman of India. He stayed on, and he said, no, there's something over there that I haven't put my finger on. And he kept walking around the village trying to see if there was something he could understand. What is it that he was missing? And if you look at this slide, you can see how degraded and dry the land was. And this isn't exactly a photo taken at that time, but it was around that time. And there's a photo in the inset, which I want you to keep track of. Just keep hold in the back of your mind, and how dry and degraded that whole land is that he was walking around. So that started trickling into his mind that this area is really, really dry. That's a photo of Rajendra as a young man. Very, you can see the beards, and you can see, I don't think he looks like a terrorist, but nevertheless. And these are photos of him when he was working with the villages and living with the villages, but I'm running ahead of the story. So as he is walking around that village, thinking, what am I missing? He met this man's father. Mangu Kaka was the name of the old man. Kaka is a very affectionate term for an uncle or for an elder. You don't call them by their name. You call them, with an honorific like that. And there was no picture of Mangu Kaka, but his father looked exactly like this with the same hat and everything. And Mangu Kaka tells Rajendra that, look, we really appreciate your noble sentiments, but you really haven't seen what we need. And have you? So Rajendra said, what do you mean? What do you need? So he says, can't you see? Mangu Kaka says, can't you see? It's so dry. No young people in the village. There's no agriculture, very little agriculture. There is no water. Give us water. Why are you giving us medicine? Medicine and education we can get. If we had the money, we could go to the market and we could get the medicine and the education. But we don't have water. Around there, the land was so degraded. So Rajendra says, look, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a civil engineer. I'm not a hydrologist. How will I give you water? And how can I repair this system? And, what has happened that has become so degraded? So Mangu Kaka says, oh, we know how to get the water back, but you have to help us. Will you do it? So Rajendra said, sure, you tell me what to do. So Mangu Kaka says, find yourself a spade and you come tomorrow and I'll tell you what to do. You meet me here, and he pointed to a spot and he said, you come and I'll tell you what to do. And so Rajendra finds a spade from somebody in the village, and the next morning he meets Mangu Kaka and they set off. And then you can imagine this scene. So they're walking down the village road, and villages across the world are quite similar. They have a main street and they have houses around, and everybody's business is everybody's business. And so a whole host of young children running behind him, and a few other people thinking, this is going to be fun. What are they going to do? And Mangu Kaka took Rajendra to a spot in the landscape and said, start digging. Don't ask questions, start digging. And Rajendra, because he knew he had to figure out what was the thing and he really wanted to do something, he started digging. And Rajendra dug and dug and dug. And you can imagine a lone man digging with a spade, taking the mud out. And he seemed to be making some kind of a, hole or a pond. He didn't know. And after a week, the villagers joined him and they said, okay, he seems to be serious. And what they were actually, Mangu Kaka and the villagers told him that there is a traditional way of building an intervention in the landscape, and I'll show you a picture, cross-section of that later, which holds the water. And instead, so when the water comes, when the rain falls, instead of running off downstream, there is an intervention which stops the water from running off. And that water becomes our surface water, and it also charges the underground aquifer, which then goes downstream and raises the water level of the water in the wells. So that's what he was doing. And Rajendra was completely amazed. And as the villagers came, they all said, okay, that's one thing, we can do this. And if we do more and more of these, then the entire landscape around us, from this state of degradation and disrepair and completely unhealthy landscape that it was, it can change. Something can happen. So that's the kind of care we can give to it. And these are scenes from the villagers. These are real, when they were all sitting together and looking at the landscape and reading the landscape. And keep in mind that none of these villagers are actually educated. They might have basic, they could read, write their name maybe, but they, maps, etc. was not, this is a different, one or two people would be able to decipher this. But in general, the entire population of the village was actually not literate. But they knew their landscape. They were very literate and educated and knew everything about their landscape. And so they sat together, looked at the whole landscape, envisioned what is the problem, drew it in the sand with their hands, and used ash that was to describe the landscape. So this is where the water flows happen, and this could be the river. And these are the interventions. So they drew their maps in the sand as to where those interventions needed to be built for the water to be held so that it would then recharge the underground aquifer, and also the surplus would become a river. And you can see they slowly that vision of what could happen was also translated in the reality. And they started work. It wasn't just that one pond that Rajendra and the villagers built. Over a period of years, this is what they started doing. They figured it out. They started digging. In those days, they dug by hand. There was no machinery or money for machinery, but they completely knew what to do. And you can see how dry it was. And slowly, they built that intervention. And this is a very big one that they built. There are other small ones which I'll show you in a minute. But they built these kind of small check dams, and you can see the water being held. And they built it. No engineers, no nothing. These are built by the villagers. They knew what to do. They had the experience. And these kind of things had been done for centuries. So then the question came that if you knew what to do, why did you stop caring for your environment? What is that? This is something you can see what's happened when you stop caring for the environment. You can see how degraded the land became. And there, of course, there are many reasons for it, and these reasons are universal. The government keeps changing, they come up with different policies. In this case, it was the government said, oh, why you bothered with these old systems? We'll give you water in a tap. But the people who said we'll give you water in a tap were so illiterate, in a sense, even though they knew how to read and write, that where will the water in the tap come from if there is no water in the landscape to draw it from? So that whole cycle of care, of disrepair, of reviving and rejuvenating, that cycle, they knew, they understood, and they revived that cycle by building these interventions in the landscape. This is a cross section of it. You can see this is the intervention. That was that. You can see what they drew in the sand over there. And here's the water coming from, and the intervention, the water is being held. Here's the cross section of that. So you can see the water is held, and it's going into percolating down and going into the underground aquifer, which then becomes full of water, and you can see the level in the wells rising. And if there's any surplus water, that actually goes through the spillway and joins the local stream. So over a period of time, in 4 years, it was a seasonal rivulet. And then in about 12 years, the river kept flowing the year round. So this was the river in 1985 when Rajendra had gone. And he always says, this is not a road, it's a river. It's a dry riverbed. And how terrible the situation was, how degraded, uncared for the landscape was. And they did the work at the same spot, complete change. So what a little bit of care does. How we can repair the earth is not so difficult. It needs us to put in that time, the love, the affection, as he says, the care for nature, and know what to do with it and do it. So knowing also isn't enough. You have to do it. You have to take that action and do it. And when you take that action, nature responds so abundantly and gives you the very means for your life to continue. And of course, the stories around this work are phenomenal. Over the next 30, 35 years, they built, the first river came to life from being dead for 8 years. But over the next 30 years, they built about 10,000 the villagers of different villages, they kept saying, come and do it for us, do it for us. They said, no, you have to do it for yourself. And when you do it for yourself, you own it. And slowly, all the villagers in different areas, they said, look at the change that's coming. We have to do this. And they built about 10, 12,000 such structures. Look at the water being held, and you can see the landscape's not brown anymore. It's beginning to look green. These are the multiple different structures and all full of water. When the rains come, they're all full of water. And that area is lush and green and slowly becoming more and more vibrant. And you can see that it's a community, it's a whole family and community effort. So you wouldn't find these folks on the front page of the Washington Post or the New York Times, but these are the guys who really knew how to revive and rejuvenate their landscape and get the rivers back to life. And that's the kind of care we talk about when the work we do with communities, and the work communities are doing and teaching us, you find it universally. Now, a very interesting other thing that happened with this, that it was a whole family affair. They all revived the river. The small input, it was a third. The funds were arranged by somebody. The villagers managed the whole project. The labor was given by them. The time was given by them. And so it was a combined, joint, collaborative effort. And with that came the water, and with the water came livelihoods, came food, came, the young men came back from the cities and started settling back and becoming farmers again instead of, and they started growing so much, surplus. First they fed themselves, and then ample food was there. They could then sell it. And so the very people they were working with, they started supplying and actually giving business to them. So that was a community action. And then the question comes, what was the government doing? It was a region, and we find this across a lot of places, that it had become so poor and so degraded, and it was so much in the back of beyond, that even the government had said, look, we can't do anything. So you saw the situation they were in before. Then even the government has said no, and then you can see the situation they're in now. They've got a river that's flowing, they've got food that's growing, etc. And so one fine day, a chap from the government was seen coming down the road, and he had a message from the government, and he handed it to the headman, who reads it and just completely is outraged. It says in the letter that you've got a river in your village, there must be fish in the village, and who are you taking a license from to take that fish from the river? So they were completely outraged and appalled, and they had what was called, they put together a river parliament. What was the very first river parliament. It was about 80 villages along that first river, which was the Arwari River. And they debated the whole issue together as a community, that when we were in such trouble, where was the government? So who does the river belong to? Who did the work? Who's caring for it? Who's looking after it? And they all, of course, had a resounding us. We did the work. It's our river. We've cared for the landscape. We've repaired it. We've revived it. So the fish belongs to us. So they wrote a letter to the government and they said, everything is fine. You're absolutely right. There's a river in our village, flowing through our villages in our region. There are fish, etc. And everything is wonderful. There's only one thing wrong in your letter, and that is, if you want to give licenses to fish in that river, the river belongs to us, and it's not we who will take the license from you. It is you who will ask our permission to give those licenses. So they put the government on notice, and that is complete clear action from a community that knows what they have done to repair their piece of the planet, and that they have done it, and it is theirs. It is their action. So to cut a long story short, over a period of time, the government realized their folly, and they said, of course, the river parliament is not a legal body, but it has a moral authority. And they bowed and said that, of course, the river is yours and the fish are yours. And if ever anybody wants licenses to fish, then you are the ones who are authorized. So the government came on board as well. And that was a real triumph. It was, it's so easy to say the government is so bad, the government is so this, and they don't do this, and they weren't doing this. But there are ways when you are courageous and you courageously take those steps to do something, to repair something, you bring on those naysayers on board as well. And the government is there to actually help you. However wicked and terrible the government may seem at the time that you're dealing with them, but they do come on board if they can see what's happening. There are other negative things. Of course, government can also start selling that wonderful fertile piece of land, but if community is together and strong, then it's much harder for those kind of things to happen. So that was Rajindra's story, and you heard from him. He goes tirelessly across the world, across India, working with many farmers, helping them think of the traditional ways, simple low-cost methods that they themselves can do. They don't have to depend on huge government subsidies or engineering works to be able to do this work. And that's surely a lesson for all of us. And when we set up the Flow Partnership, this is what we were thinking, that surely communities weren't always dependent on governments. Surely they looked after and cared for their landscape, and there must be traditional methods everywhere. And so the next place we go to is Africa. We recently set up a water school in Africa, and it's an online water school at the moment, primarily for communities to share these kind of methods that they themselves are doing, to revive their landscapes. But in the process of setting up this online school, the water school, we came across a wonderful man called the water harvester of Zimbabwe, and his story was phenomenal. That's Zephaniah Phiri, and many of you must have heard of him because many water leaders in America have been, like Brad Lancaster and Brock Dolman and others, have been to Zephaniah's region and seen what he's done. He was an amazing individual and a beautiful soul who never let circumstances get him down. He was arrested, he was put in chains when they let him, the current ruling people, when they let him free in some very degraded landscape, put his family in and said, go live over there. And if he had fallen prey to dejection and not been the absolutely positive, forward-thinking, looking at what he can do in service of nature and man. If he hadn't been that kind of person, he would have definitely died. They wanted to kill him. They put him in leg irons. You can see he was in, that's him on the left as an older man, but that's younger. They put him in leg irons, which meant that he couldn't actually go more than a few steps. And yet, with all that, that's the kind of land they put him in. I don't have pictures of before, but with all that, he enthused, you see him as a young, he enthused his local people that the first thing you have to do is hold the water in your land. He used to call it planting water. And he said, there is so much water that falls on this land and it all runs away. Now, this to me was echoing exactly what Rajendra had been saying. It's a common universal principle. If the water runs away, it doesn't go into the ground. And there's a wonderful video, which I'll give you the link of at the end, where he says, it's like the blood in my body. When I have a cut, the blood should oozes out, but it shouldn't be oozing out. It should remain in my body to keep it healthy. And that same thing is with the water. If the water runs away, then it's not in the earth keeping it healthy. So we have to plant the water before we can plant the crops. And when there's water, then you can have a healthy soil and healthy crops. That was his very simple message, and he had very simple ways of what he used to call the firi pits. And they were very small little pits where, in the ways the water would come and it would go in. And slowly, there were other pits. There were different techniques, and I'm not going into the techniques over here. It's just to introduce you to what these guys were doing. And he kept water on his land. This is a wonderful image of him as an older person. You can see he didn't let life get him down. He was always looking forward. Look at the change on that land. From this to look at this. Amazing, beautiful trees giving fruit, kitchen gardens. They worked and worked, and they set up an organization called the Muhande Trust, and they are all, that way of Zephaniah's of creating small pits and holding the water is something that slowly, more and more villages are taking, paying attention to and seeing the difference when they hold the water in their landscape. And it was what a life, what an amazing life that man had, and what a service he gave in spite of so many challenges. And that's the point of his story, that no matter what challenges you have, if you have the will, you can repair whatever is broken in the system in your land. Sadly, Zephaniah passed away in 2015, but his legacy lives on. His wonderful words, his enthusiasm, his passion lives on in the work that his communities are doing across. I never tire of saying, I love this image of him sitting and looking at the greenery that is now there in his region. There's another wonderful man from Slovakia who you will hear of in this conference, in the summit, Mikhail Kravchik, and various people from his organization, and he's also speaking. But when we went to visit him in Slovakia, it was very similar. So here we go, from India to Africa to Europe, and you meet the same thing. You meet communities here, instead of being in drought, they are flooded out. And Mikhail fought against, there's a wonderful, I call him the waterman of Slovakia, and there is very little about what is happening in the water system of the world, of the climate, that Mikhail doesn't know. So please, I really urge you, if you see his session, do go and hear it. Amazing understanding of how the repair that we need for the planet can happen and why. And he fought against a dam that was being proposed, something like this, which would have flooded 800 villages downstream. And he fought against that dam being built. And instead, he worked with the villages along that river, and they built such love, such care. Look at that, beautiful. Together, they built these small little leaky dams to hold the water so that flood wouldn't happen, repairing when there were, storms which brought the trees down. That's another photo of Mikhail. And you can see it was a staggered system of dams which slowed the water down and stopped the flooding downstream. So this is the point that I wanted to make over here, that floods and droughts are two sides of that same coin. No? So you have the same kind of interventions that you build in the landscape, which hold the water, and in the right place, they stop a flood from occurring, and in the right place, they alleviate the conditions of a drought. So these, look at this beauty. From flooded, you have this kind of beauty that was created by Mikhal and his various and they continue doing that. This is a wonderful book written by him, Water for the Recovery of the Climate. In fact, Jan Pokorny, also who's one of the authors, is also speaking at the summit. So if you hear his, if you can go to his session as well. And the book is free. You can get it from our website or online. And it is a fantastic, small, thin book, which really gives you all the info and the science that you need to know about how we can recover the climate. So what I wanted to say is these are the voices of communities everywhere showing us how to care for the earth and repair what's happening by holding water. So holding water is the primary, fundamental, basic ingredient for life on earth. If it goes, the system breaks. If it comes back, that's when we find we have done a good repair job. It's all part of the water cycle, the local water cycle. So this is, the next set of slides I'll just run through very quickly. Different organizations that we work with. This is work that they've done even before we started partnering with them and seeing how we can amplify this work more and more. Again, you'll see these are all communities. They've understood that what is the route to repair a broken climate system? What is the route to repair their landscape? So small ponds here, you can see the difference of here, water harvesting can make. This is in Zambia, colleagues of ours in Zambia who work with schools, so training the next generation. You can see in different beautiful styles and look at the difference, what's on the left and how it is later. Great. This is colleagues of ours who work in Malawi called Tieni, and they have a method called the deep bed farming system where you can see how they hold the water and it completely changes the landscape for the farmers. These are friends in Kenya, the Otoni, who do sand dams along with the communities. You can see them building it, and when the water comes, water change it makes in the landscape. The water is held. Africa is very hot, so even though surface water is gone, water is held underneath, and so that it doesn't evaporate. There's a whole system, which holds that water. Very similar to the johars that Rajendra and all do, except this works underground, and you can see the change in the community coming together and thinking what else to do and what are the ways that they hold the water or how they draw the water out. So here you can see the communities are slowly taking matter in their own hands. So from large ponds to medium-sized ponds to dams to check dams to little ponds, these are all methods of holding water which communities know. Most of them are not educated as civil engineers. They are just communities, they're farmers, they're landowners, they live in villages, and yet they know something which we educated people often forget. And that is how to keep that water cycle alive. So you can see how beautiful. Every time you see something like this, you just think, wow, this is what is really creating that, bringing alive that the water cycle and the planet back to life again. And so it's in the hands of communities. This is the latest project that we've done in this year before the monsoons. And here we are working with another organization called Parmath. And we looked at it as a whole village approach. So instead of one water body, how do you make the whole village water secure? So what are the different methods that you can use so that now they can come and take the water that they need? The women can take the water there. So these are before and after. You can see the pre is up there, and this monsoon. So the before, these were taken sometime in June, and this is in August, end of August. So this August. You can see how much water has been held. So just clearing the silt up and clearing it up and deepening them and widening them, they had fallen into disrepair. They'd stopped looking after them, and now look at after cleaning them up, and they all work together to make these ponds alive again. And look at the amount of water that's held. So here's the last one over there. So This is not once in a lifetime work. This is work which we have to continuously care for. Do we drink water once in a year? No, we drink water every day. So it stands to reason if we drink water every day, then whatever we drink or whatever water we use has to be replenished somewhere. And that's the work that we have to keep in mind. That's the first step, the first awareness that uh, even if it is not us who live in cities holding the water, but there is somebody holding it for us. Because if they hold it for us, then it is there in the landscape, keeps the water cycle healthy and alive. Food is grown, which comes onto our shelves, which we then buy. So the connection is very, very clear. We are all in this collaboratively together. So if we drink it, then we have to replenish it. Keep that equation in mind. This is what we need to keep thinking of to be able to repair our landscapes. So slowing the flow, recharging wells and landscapes, that's what brings life. I mean, we forget that the water cycle and the life cycle are one. Once the water cycle goes, we're gone. If there's no water, none of us will be around. So communities, they remember that it's the communities when they revive their small water cycles and make them healthy. That's the most important part of caring for the planet. And this is a lovely, lovely image of the water cycle, which, we all know. We studied it when we were in school. We studied possibly in colleges, etc. But it's just such a simple cycle. It's a circular motion of how the water goes from the ground into the ocean, up into the atmosphere, and back to the ground again. And if we keep this circular motion going, we are healthy. If we break that, then everything falls apart. No, the land becomes dry, as you saw, and people have to move away. There's distress migration, there's no food security, there's crime, then every other problem comes from not starts with not having enough water in the landscape, which leads to all sorts of insecurities. It's a very, when that water cycle breaks, it becomes a cycle of neglect. And so we have to respond with a cycle of care. That cycle of neglect, that impoverishment of the landscape, which leads to desertification, flooding. These are words now leaping out at us from every corner. This year alone, we have seen globally, it's now lapping on the shores of the Western nations, droughts. Whoever heard of a drought in England? And this year whoever heard of a drought in Europe? If you look at the math, these are temperature charts, NASA temperature charts, which showed in 1976 what the temperature of the planet was. And look at 2022. So the land is becoming drier and the earth is becoming hotter. So, the kind of stories we are hearing, they're not surprising. Look at that neglect we've done of our landscape, of holding that water. We cut down trees, we build huge buildings where there's this constant growth model that seems to have gripped the whole world without care that you cannot have infinite growth because there aren't infinite resources. So something is broken in that chain of thought, which is what those youngsters at the beginning were wanting to remind us of. And if we bring that back, then we can have a healthy planet. I've been talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions? I could pause here for a bit, and then I've just got a last story which I wanted to show you from another project, which was a pandemic time. But I can take a pause over here if anybody has a question. Yes, Eduardo.
Hi, thank you so much. That's been so interesting and inspiring. I live here on the West Coast in Cowichan Territory, Vancouver Island, off the west coast of Canada. And one of things are drying up here pretty badly. We finally got a little bit of rain today, and here we are at the end of October. And I work to some degree with one of the local Indigenous nations here on restoration efforts and whatnot. And so my interest is the impacts of the climate crisis on restoration efforts. And so I'm thinking about the projects you've mentioned and wanting to know, first of all, sort of like what the impacts have been. And then secondly, whether smaller projects like that have the ability, and this is where I get into the inspiration side of things, if they have the ability to stem or to mitigate to some degree by creating local microclimates or local sort of systems as ways of sort of pushing back on the larger macro situation in terms of the climate crisis. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, so that's a really good question. The first thing is, yes, of course, climate change is a global, it's a planetary phenomena. It's not just local. And when that happens, it's impacting us in cities, it's impacting us in villages, it's impacting us, it is, the impacts of it are there. So you can't mitigate them totally. You can adapt to those changes. So some of these strategies are for adapting to climate change realities. However, I don't have I'm not showing you those slides today, but I can show them to you at another time. When you create these water bodies, slowly, when the greenery appears and more greenery appears, then the local water cycle starts becoming healthy again. And if it happens at scale, enough number or enough area of land is now under a healthy water cycle, then definitely it has an impact on the amount of rain that falls on that bit. The larger pressures are there, but locally you can make a difference. Now we need to do enough of them for it to impact climate change as well. So if you go to Mikhal's session, Mikhal often he says that we have very little time to turn that around. But if all of us built a water body, or if all of us held, I don't have the figure off the top of my head, 7 million tons of cubic meters of water or something, which is what is the runoff. If we held it, then we would make a huge impact in climate change. So these figures are there. It's just that which kind of science do politicians push? No? And that's where the problem is. It's the denial, the lying, the cheating, the alternative facts, the alternative truth, whatever they want to say, they say. But the reality is that this can have an impact if enough amount of it is done. So it's what the restoration efforts have to go on regardless.
Yeah.
You cannot worry about whether it will have an impact on that or not. It will have an impact. Whatever it is, it will have an impact on the lives of the people who are living without that water. That's the first. And the landscape, the flora, the fauna, the animals, the other inhabitants. So it's not just human-centric. It brings entire life back. So that's that first duty of care, that it's not just our lives, it's everybody's lives, every being's life that comes back into being alive again. And then if we do enough of that, of course, it'll have an impact. And then our work is to do the right thing. And the long-term goal will take care of itself. But if we worry that the long-term goal is happening or not happening, who knows? We don't know what's happening, how long we have on this planet. But our time on this planet has to take care of what is happening now, and then the long term will take care of it.
Yeah. I'd like to chime in and say I'm also here in Pacific Northwest, the Great Pacific Northwest, which has drought and flood cycles and fire this year. And I've been involved in doing water retentive landscape design for a number of years now. And what I find is really important is there's that big water cycle that Minni's talked about and showed the graphic of, but even more important is this small water cycle of the dew and condensation and transpiration and just rehydrating local areas, not whole watersheds. But if we do this pocket by pocket and create a rehydrated landscape through these small interventions, these small water bodies, and a lot of times that's really all we can do because we have so much regulation and permitting and everything else that is a big stumbling block in North America. To do to do the right thing, it's prohibitive. And so you have to be simple and small and do a lot of small little interventions that stay below the radar of permitting policy issues to slow the water down, spread it, sink it, and rehydrate the aquifer and the landscape using that small water cycle kind of intervention.
Totally, Brian. It is the small water cycle. We are looking after the small water cycles, and the big water cycle then will take care of itself. It's the all these communities that I'm showing you the work of. They are looking after the small water cycle, and that's what's regenerating, rehydrating, reviving, giving life, whatever we want to attach to it. That's what it's doing, and that's the work. So whatever you can do. Don't get as you say, there are so many regulations. I mean, I even heard something like in the States that you can't even collect the water on which falls on your land if they've sold the water rights. So it's becoming absurd. The kind of regulation is absurd. So at some point, that will fall apart. We have to keep, working in the face of that. Just keep that in the back of your pocket and do whatever you can, but not do. No?
Yeah.
Anybody else with anything, or shall I continue?
Well, I just also add that I get asked a lot of times, how do you prove what you're doing is making a difference? Did you like measure the well before and then after? Or did you like check the soil, or did you do this and that? And it's like, yeah, you could spend a lot of money and time doing all these
that's what they do, Brian. That's
scientific things, but also you can just look at the health of the greenery during the dry time and the health of the planets, or the speed in which trees grow, or any of these other metrics that are more qualitative instead of quantitative.
What is the evidence? No, that's the favorite question of everybody around. If there's no evidence, we don't give you no money. That's the favorite of all these people who sit on vast amounts of wealth. Where are your evidence reports? The evidence report, more often than not, is your common sense. Get off your chair, go to the place you think, you would like us to prove whether something has happened, and go and talk to the villagers. See the healthy and happy smiling children, see the, food that is growing over there, see the difference in the landscape. That's your evidence. If you want to sit and measure it, let the accountants do it. Of course, some bit of measurement is good so that we can understand that this is how it connects, and those who love numbers can also become part of it. But it seems to be evidence is now pulling the wagon, and that's really not the right place for it to be. So it's more that we have to encourage this to happen. But if we wait for the evidence, I think the planet's definitely going to be in serious trouble. So we've got to, we don't even have to convince people now anymore. It's in such dire straits. So that if they want to wait for evidence, I think all the evidence we need is there. We don't need to create more jobs and more evidence. How much more evidence do we need? We've got enough graphs and charts and everything coming out from NASA, like we saw over there. Look at the temperature changes. And we've got enough evidence from communities who were hungry and the landscape was finished and now is lush and green because of ponds in the water cycle they've created. So that's the evidence. So we can choose which bit we want to work with. No?
Yeah. Very well said.
Right. How much time do I have more, Brian?
10 minutes or so.
10 minutes or so. Okay. So I'll quickly go through these slides. This was a project we did just before the start of the pandemic. And we worked with this. I put in here because this is where we worked with actually a civil engineering firm called Arup, and they're all civil engineers, some of the best civil engineering minds in the country and the world, working in water, and some of my complete illiterate, uneducated villagers. And the meeting of minds of science and community that came together was phenomenal and fantastic and really heartwarming to see. So that sort of answers that question of those who want to sit and do measurements can do measurements, but there are those who also know the power of measurements as well as the power of that qualitative measurement. No, this particular is what's happened. Yeah. This was again in Rajasthan, and this is also in collaboration with Rajendra, but this was done last 2-3 years. Place called Maharajpura, which is in Karoli, which is very, very dry and it's in the similar area, but much in the hinterland. 100% of the people over there were considered living below the poverty line. And you can see that, in the community, this was a drone shot of the watercourse over there, how badly it had dried up. and what needed to happen. So this is meetings with the villagers, and they said, okay, we need to build a johar. This is Rajendra, wonderful picture of Rajendra talking with the women. We never do anything until the community comes on board. So we're not doing it for the community, we are doing it with them. And it's not it's often said that, oh, but they're uneducated and you're educated and there's a ledge difference. There isn't. If they do the work, we benefit. If we do something for them, they benefit. And it's an equal thing. We benefit in the wonderful climate that changes, or the food that they produce. So that when it gets across to them and they join in, and then the project is theirs. So without water, we have nothing, was what we heard a lot. And then the village council sat together and deliberated on whether they should say yes or not, because then it's a commitment of time and resources and money and labor, etc., that the villagers have to commit to. So they do it off agricultural season time. They said yes, they signed on the paper, and then we arranged for some of the funds, and they started the work. And you can see the work is going on slowly. These are just very quick images. I'll show you how, this was a fairly big size pond again that they were doing, and this is the spillway that they were creating. And then this structure was built in that watercourse. So this is just, you can see they've dug it out, they've created this, it's like an embankment, a band or a johar, whatever you call it, that was done just before the monsoons began. And then in 6 months, see the magic that happened. This is 6 months. So earth repair does not even take like hundreds of years, as many, or 10 years or 3 years or 5 years, as many would have us believe. In 6 months, this is the magic that happened. And that was in July, August, and this was end of September. And this is, end of September, early October. Look at the difference. Look at that difference. So when the rain comes, the water is held instead of flowing. Children are swimming around. The wells are completely full of water, 22 wells. There's no need to migrate. People who had come back to the villages from the cities because they couldn't eat in the cities and because of the lockdowns, they walked and came to the villages. They don't need to migrate again, because in the villages they had left because there was no food and went to the city. Now, because of the pandemic, they couldn't eat in the city. They came back to the same villages. But now the village had food, it had water, it had food. So why would they go? They said, we've got good vegetation and crops. What is the need to migrate? So once we make up our mind to take action, we can really go from this to this in a matter of few months. This is magic. This magic happens when we decide we really want to repair something. We really want to work with it. He's sitting there comfortably. He's not worried anymore. And look at the water buffalo. They're enjoying the water. They need the water. They need you can't keep the water buffalo until there's water for them. So the question came when I was putting this together. What came to my mind was this older generation and the next generation are hammering that message. What happened in between? What did our generation do? What are we doing? It's that scale of natural disasters. This is this year. Look at this. Europe, so hot. Look at the Rhine has disappeared almost. This is the Yangtze River in China. Looks beautiful, and yet it's dry. It's incredible. Every part of the world, these are the last 3 or 4 months these disasters are happening. So floods and droughts across the world. So there is obviously, the only way we can get out of this mess is taking action. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we care for the earth and help to repair it? That's when we live in cities, what is it we can do? So I always feel that the first thing comes out of awareness of what is my water footprint, how much water am I using, and how can I replenish that? So this is a message for us from the past, from Zephaniah, and the film is Fiery Pits, and I'll put the links at the bottom, but it's an amazing film. If you see, it's a 5-minute film, and he says, let's work together. This he said about 10 years ago. I wish every country from us could meet, share ideas, and then we'd come up with better results. And then this I put in because I really love this young woman. She's so articulate. It's a message from our future. And she says, that she's inviting us to be part of the solution. It's a shame our generation is so blind. What are we doing that you have such youngsters telling us what we need to do? Surely we have to become part of that solution. That solution is we work together, we take action together. And we should really be courageous about having that hope, having that determination to do what is the right thing, however we do it. But if we do it together, there's strength in numbers. And that hope comes from us, the people, never mind those in power who are not really letting us do anything. So that's really where, we set up the One Pond Fund for communities to be able to put up their pond projects, because projects always need, there's labor, there's time, but there's also some money that's required by the communities. We said that the language of water is the common universal language of life. If we care for it, we all know only one planet. The planet cares for us. And ultimately, we have to increase that action on the ground. And that action comes from all of us looking at it as a large community. So these are, these last few images of community meetings across the world. It's the same. It's the same. I just love these small conversations. This is happening in Africa. This is happening in India. This is on another thing in India. This is happening in England. These are, different images. This is happening in the Midwest, I think, somewhere. So, we're all community together. We can do and make that change. And this quote of Helen Keller's always echoes down the ages, that we can do so little on our own, but together we can really do so much. These are the links, and you can find them, and I can always put them in the chat or whatever. And if you want, you can mail me and I can send them to you. They're amazing videos of Zephaniah Phiri's work. There is one, the rainwater harvester, but the water harvester, which is his whole history, is phenomenal, beautiful to see that. And then the Phiri pits. And this is our contact. The online water school is waterways.world, and then the One Pond Fund. So anyhow, you want any information, you want to know how to get cracking with your local communities, or if you have some communities that are doing fantastic work, and share that with us, that'll be always appreciated. So I think I can stop over here, and if there are any last minute questions or anything, or discussion points that we want.
Thanks so much, Minni. That was wonderful. So good to hear all this good work going on everywhere, and encouragement for us to do everything here as well.
I think Susan, thank you. I think Susan has her hand up. Susan, would you like? Yes.
Yes. Sorry, my camera's not working. Just a point of technical fact, you have a small creek. We're trying to create a preserve that the community purchased the land. It's only 65 acres, neglected, old golf course, noxious weeds. We have to do river restoration. Does the sheet flooding in the spring, if we help mitigate that, right? If we have a place for sheet flooding to happen, does that water, can it be held in a pond a little bit longer instead of immediately sheet flooding right back into the creek?
I'm not understanding. Did you say sheet flooding or sheet flooding?
Sheet, as in sheet flooding, where the river overflows her banks.
Yes.
And then has to creep along or steadily crawl across the land for when we do have floods.
Yeah.
Can we create a pond to keep some of that water in the pond instead of it just flooding over the land and going back into the creek immediately?
Why not? I'm not an engineer, but what we've seen in flooded areas is, and I didn't show you the images from Belford in the UK, but we had an iconic project done by our colleague Paul, where when the river was flooding, okay, they created channels for that water to go and be held in similar johar type structures, so that it would stop the flooding downstream, but that water would remain, and they could actually move it to areas. They call them offline ponds, and they could move it to areas where there wasn't enough water. So why ever not? The only thing you have to keep in mind is what is the level of toxic pollution in that river. So you, of course, you need to stop that flooding, but is that water, how sometimes just upstream, you'll know what are the kind of farms and what kind of pollutants are going in there. So if it's not polluted, you're fine. But if it's very polluted, then is it worth holding that polluted water? So that's the thing to just check. You can check, even you don't have to even measure it or test it. You just need to know what's upstream of the river, and you'll get. But it's definitely worth it.
Yeah,
no, it's very clean water. And
I would add there's a lot of different strategies, and it kind of all depends on your topography and the flow and all that stuff. But there's like beaver analogs, which are like leaky dams. There's, like you say, take swales and funnel it off to the side and have temporary holding ponds when you have those peak water events. You can also look at infiltrating the water that's coming across your landscape, just in the landscape, through keyline or terracing or swales. So there's a lot of things that can infiltrate that water that are not ponds necessarily. That it just totally depends on your topography and your soil types and the amount of water that you have flowing.
And that might be enough water. That might be enough water being held just for those few weeks of spring flood, because it's from runoff from the mountains, the snow, to really get trees and plants established. That's enough for them to drink. They get their big drink, and then they'll get minimal, because we don't get much precipitation through the summer months. They'll have to wait till fall again, but we could still have a regenerative landscape based on saving a little bit more water.
Yes, absolutely. You did that, what Brian said, and echoing that and the previous project I was mentioning. Actually, it is up there on our website. If you go to www.theflowpartnership.org and look for Belford. So that's totally to do with leaky dams and offline ponds and woody debris and living willows, and how to create all this. So how they did all that, and they stopped the flooding and held the water. So if you go to the website on the projects page, you'll see some of that work over there. But there's a lot of that kind of work happening. And actually, Brian, and others from the US would have US related, similar kind of projects.
Yeah. All right, we're running a bit over time, so we should probably wrap up. If people wanted to, any last comments or thoughts?
That's great.
All right.
And if questions arise, you can always email. Our website is there, and you can always email me at minni@earthlingsol.com. It's there on the. I can put it in the chat if anybody wants. So, it's www.theflowpartnership.org, and the email is minni@earthlingsol.com. You'll find us.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank
Thank you so much for your time and your presentation and your effort and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the